Hello, good morning. We are live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and in the real world too. My name's Shamash, author of Mindfulness for Dummies, and today we're going to talk about injustice. Why is there injustice in the world? Are we unjust, unjust? And what can we do about it? So I'm going to talk about this model that I've come up with, which I think will be interesting. But I'm going to begin with this story about how I discovered my own injustice, doing acts of injustice in a way. Excuse me. So the story goes, I used to be a school teacher for about 10 years, and I used to have so many classes. How many? Maybe 10 or 15 classes I was teaching, and every term, every 3 or 4 months, I had to write reports. So we had to write it. Back in the old days, we actually even had to write it by hand. So these little pieces of paper, and we had to write down in semi-calligraphy every single child's report. And so I was teaching hundreds and hundreds of children, and I was teaching them different science, physics, chemistry, biology, and to write reports for them all. So I was writing all these sets of reports, and it takes about a week or two just to write them, every evening and during the day, whenever you can. And I remember writing one set of reports for a class, and I thought I'd written them, but I wasn't sure. And so I was writing them, and I written them out again. And then I found these reports, and then I found the old reports that I'd written for the same class. So I had this old set of reports, which I'd written probably just 2 or 3 days before, and the reports on that day. And I thought the two reports should look almost exactly the same, right? It's the same children, the same class. I'm the same teacher. So I should have the same opinion. But one set of reports were nowhere near as positive as the other one. One set of reports thought that they weren't doing too well and they needed more work and had to work harder. And the other set of reports seemed to be a bit more glowing and a bit more positive about the children and their potential for success in that subject. But when I'd written each of those reports, I thought I was being completely neutral. Like, I was thinking about the child and how the child was doing and what they needed to improve on. I didn't think that they were different at all. And so my only conclusion was that I must have been in a slightly different mood on that particular day. And so I wrote a different opinion for the same child. And that's an example of unfairness, right? Injustice. One child would have got a report saying that, he wasn't doing so well in chemistry, and he's done too many explosions, and the experiments have all gone wrong, and he really needs to, work on it. And the other one was like, very creative. He even done a couple of explosions in the classroom, which I really appreciated, and I liked his attitudes to the way he cleaned up the lab afterwards. So 2 opinions for the same situation. And then later on, as I started to look at research on it, there's some amazing stories of how people act in an unjust way, in an unfair way, but again, unconsciously. For example, one study that I like to share is judges. So there's a set of judges that they researched, and they were looking at whether they were going to release certain prisoners. Just think of it like that. And so these different prisoners come in, and they come in the morning, and the judges look at their case and they say, yeah, you've done this. Yeah, you can leave. But they found there was a pattern. In the mornings, the prisoners, whichever the prisoners were that came in, they had a high chance of them being released. But as they got closer and closer to lunchtime, less prisoners got released. Then they had lunch, these and after lunch, more prisoners got released. But then as the time went past, less and less prisoners got released. So they tried to think, they asked the judges, like, were you being completely fair throughout the day? Like, there seems to be a bit of a pattern here going on. You're releasing more people in the morning and then less around lunchtime and then more again in the morning. And the chances, if you're just before lunch or just before dinner time, your chance of being released as a prisoner was almost zero. Whereas in the morning, you had a much better chance. And they found it was to do with the sugar levels, the glucose levels in the bloodstream of the judges. And the judges didn't know this. They thought they were being completely fair. But they found that as their levels of sugar went down, as they were more and more hungry, they were less likely to make a positive decision about that particular case. But they didn't know that themselves at all. Then there's another experiment. This is an amazing one, okay? And this is a really clever experiment. It's done with someone having a cup of tea. So they take an actor who's having a cup of tea, and he's got a map in his hand and he's looking a bit confused. So he's an actor, he's part of the experiment. And then they wait for someone to come along, and the actor says, "Oh, I'm a bit lost. Can you help me?" And this actor would give the person the cup of tea to hold so that he can show the map to the person. And in the first experiment, the cup of tea is hot. So it's a hot cup of tea. This random person comes along, they hold their cup of tea, they give them directions, and then they give the tea back again. In the other half of the experiment, the person drinking the cup of tea is a cold cup of tea, ice cold or coldish. And then afterwards, the researchers, they catch the person who was helping the person with directions, and they said, by the way, we're just doing a bit of an experiment. What did you think of that person that you met? The one who you were helping with directions. This is the amazing thing. If the person was drinking a hot cup of tea, they thought that was a warm person. They thought they were a kind person. Because of when they held the cup of tea, unconsciously, they didn't register it, but it's a warm cup of tea, and they associate the person as being a warm person, a kind person. If the cup of tea was cold, then if they asked the person later on, what did you think of the person? They're like, yeah, they're all right. They were a little bit weird. Would you just describe them as distant or cold or something? And they were like, yeah, a little bit, not so kind, not so friendly. Again, this is an unconscious influence on them. They, when they asked them, I think they asked them later on, did you notice about the cup of tea? Of course, they noticed, but they didn't say that influenced their decision about what they thought about the person. So these little experiments, and there's loads more, seem to suggest that unconsciously we're influenced in a way that goes under the radar and makes us behave in a way that's unfair. All these examples were examples of people judging other people unfairly, and they didn't even know, an unconscious form of judgment. And so the way that I like to depict this is my Iceberg model. Now, funnily enough, I was talking about being a school teacher, and I always remember the one main poster I had in my classroom for ages was just an iceberg. I don't know why. I like the iceberg and the fact that we have this hidden depth to us. That was all the poster said, hidden depths. So this iceberg model of human beings, in a way, is that we have a conscious part to ourselves, which is really tiny. We think it's our whole world. It's about who you are and who you think you are consciously. But that's just actually the tiny conscious part of our mind. And then the other part of our mind is our unconscious mind. Right now, your unconscious mind is, doing your digestion, your immune system's functioning unconsciously. And I would argue even the thoughts that you're having right now, they're arising from your unconscious and into your conscious. And if there's time, another day, I'll share with you some experiments they did where they ask people questions, and they can actually measure what thoughts are coming up from the unconscious, and then it comes into the conscious, and then the person speaks it or does the action. So part of the unconscious part of what influences us is our genetics, I would say, our past upbringing, our mood at the time. In all these examples, it was the mood that was influencing them. Past ideas that you've had, traumas you've had in the past, memories you've had, the culture, both externally. A lot of these external influences influence us. Television programs, media. I haven't put media in, but of course media has a big influence. Advertising are huge. It's no coincidence that huge companies spend so much money on advertising. That it's a very good investment. It influences you unconsciously. There's a famous experiment where Heinz baked beans, they decided everybody knows baked beans is Heinz. We don't need to advertise. We don't need to keep spending money advertising to buy Heinz beans. As soon as they did that, their sales started to slowly go down. So these are all our unconscious influences that affect us. And so these unconscious influences affect our actions. And that is one way I would argue that there is injustice in the world. People in the examples I shared with you, they were not being consciously unfair. They were being unconsciously unfair. They didn't know about it. Now, some people are being unfair in a conscious way. So they decide, I'm going to be unfair. Like, I don't like this person because of their religion or their race or their political belief or whatever. I'm consciously going to annoy them or upset them or do something nasty to them. even in that scenario, I would argue it's because of all their past influences going into their conscious, and that leading to their decision to act purposely. It seems like they're acting in a purposeful way to do something wrong or bad. But um, my argument is that if you dug in deep enough, there would be a reason for that. You may be able to find it, you may not be able to find it. It could be to do with even a brain disorder or their genes or some idea that they have somehow started to believe. We don't know. We can never know exactly. So all these influences are gonna impact on our decisions, and this is where the mindfulness comes in. As we start to become more mindful, this conscious part doesn't actually end up being to the bottom of here. You can't be conscious of every single thing, but you can start to be a bit conscious of a bit more of what's going on. And the very fact that you may have an insight about this model, you may be more likely to believe this kind of thing, because when you try and do a bit of mindfulness and meditation, you realize the stream of thoughts that just keep coming. Even if you've been meditating for 100 years, the thoughts will keep popping up in your head. They'll keep coming and keep arising, and they're arising from all these different influences and situations. If you go on a retreat for a long time and there's a lot of silence, yes, it may quieten down because there's a little bit less of this, but it will still be there. There'll still be a culture even in the retreat, wherever you are. So there's always influences coming from our unconscious to our conscious, and what can we do about it? Well, we can take some time to reflect and know that whether it's an other person or ourselves, we won't be able to act completely fairly and completely neutrally all the time, because we're human beings and we don't just have a logical reason thinking brain. We also have an emotional part of our brain, and that emotional part of our brain influences in a huge way and has a huge impact on our behavior and our actions. And it's not just us, it's other people, it's all human beings, it's probably all animals as well. I'd like to see hi Augusto, good to see you here. Yeah, so love to hear your thoughts about this. If you could leave a comment below if you found this helpful or interesting. If you liked it, press like, share if you want to share it with your friends. And we'd just love to have some feedback about if you found this useful, if you think the Iceberg model is good or not, what your thoughts are, or just acknowledge that you found it helpful if you did. And if not, tell me as well. Thanks a lot for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. So today we're exploring the value of justice, injustice, and fairness and unfairness. And tomorrow will be another value. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.